Okay, I'm going to mute you all for now, and then you could unmute yourself when you want to talk. Um, Please remember that anytime you have a question or you wish to bring up something to my attention, please feel free to unmute yourself anytime. And okay, so I'd like to begin with reciting the name of the Buddha or Gassho. So if I can ask you to join me in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us for our fall winter session. Last time I didn't really get as far as I wanted to go, and so I wanted to continue on this week, talking a little bit more in depth about some of the things that we started to talk about last week. And I did send last week 2 documents, and the one is actually a challenge or a commentary made by Reverend Dr. David Matsumoto. If for those of you who do not know who Matsumoto Sensei is, he is actually, is he retired now? He might be retired now, but he was the head of the Institute of Buddhist Studies down in Berkeley, California. He was probably one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent, English scholar of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, and yet he is very down to earth. He had led quite a challenging life himself. He was a very successful lawyer before becoming a minister, and what caused him to become a Jodo Shinshu minister was that he lost his wife to cancer at a very young age. And that really made him start questioning about his own life. And so he became, he studied in Japan for a number of years. And when I went to study in Japan, he was just finishing up his studies there and was about to return back to North America. But after his first wife passed away, and he decided he was going to become a Jodo Shinshu minister, I believe before he started his studies, he met somebody else and they got married. And they are very happily married, but they had one child, and he was born with Down syndrome. And so Matsumoto Sensei has seen a lot of things through his life, but he became one of the, or if not the most prominent English scholar of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And he had led his own workshop a number of years ago, and this was one of the documents that he had included in his workshop, this Our Path of Deepening Awareness. And some of you have, I used this once before in one of my lecture series. And it's quite a challenging piece because he talks about Amida Buddha. And did you all read this over the week? Some of you, yes? No? Did you get this? I hope you got it. Yeah, you got it. Okay. So he basically says, that Shin Buddhism begins with a beautiful story, which has been told and passed down throughout the ages. In the largest sutra of Measurable Life, Shakyamuni Buddha tells us of a Bodhisattva Dhammakara who aspired to attain Buddhahood in order to bring all beings to the same enlightenment. Under the guidance of Lokeshvara Raja Buddha, he viewed every Buddha land and selected the most superlative features from them all. He proclaimed 48 great vows to bring all beings to birth in his wondrous land and thereby enable them to attain the highest truth. He then engaged in practices over endless eons of time and attained perfect enlightenment, becoming the Buddha of immeasurable light, Amitabha, and immeasurable life, Amitayus, creating a pure realm of peace and bliss, Sukhavati, where beings could practice the way to Buddhahood and establishing a path for birth for all beings. So this is a story of Amida Buddha, a narrative of unqualified beauty and mythic power. It has long inspired people to direct themselves to attainment of birth in the Buddha's land. For Shinran Shonin, Shakyamuni Buddha was born in this world in order to tell us this story. And Shinnan's religious life was born upon the ground of the larger sutra. For it revealed to him the possibility of universal liberation within the true essence of the Pure Land Way, Jodo Shinshu. Many years have passed since that time, and for many reasons, the story of Amida Buddha, which has been taught in many of our BCA temples, that's Buddhist Church of America temples, is really a later version of the original story. That version goes like this. When Dhammakara attained enlightenment and became Amida Buddha 10 kalpas ago, our birth in the Pure Land and our salvation was assured right then and there. As a result, there is now nothing that we need to do in order to attain birth. There is no practice for us to engage in. It's a done deal. We simply have to hear this beautiful story of Amida Buddha and believe in it, for it is already true. Then all we can do is recite the Nembutsu saying Namo Amida Butsu as an expression of gratitude for our being saved. Our lives become those of gratitude, and we know that after we die, we will be born in the Pure Land in the life to come. This is also a beautiful and heartwarming tale, but unlike the story in the larger sutra, this version has problems, especially for those of us born and raised in the West. We are told to believe in the story, but is the story true? Were we really saved 10 kalpas ago? Is there a Pure Land somewhere out there that we will go to after we die? Or is this story nothing more than a fairy tale, a myth to be believed by young children and old persons for whom death is nigh? For those raised in a Judeo-Christian, and especially for those raised as Judeo-Christians, this story seems too close for comfort. We've heard the same story growing up, and we were told then, as now, just believe in it, just have faith in it, and we will be saved. So we ask ourselves, is this story really Buddhism or some kind of ancient morality tale? There's another problem with this version of the story. Just where might this story lead us, assuming we believe it is true? In ancient times, this story led some people to believe they had the license to commit evil acts. After all, since they were already saved, nothing they did would prevent them from being born. So they were free to commit any kind of evil deed without fear of retribution. Some people even claimed that they could commit evil acts of faith, as it were, since they would in that way demonstrate their faith in the power of Amida Buddha's vow to save the evil being. Today, in contrast, I believe that people are more likely to come to a different conclusion, which I call La-di-da Buddhism. It goes like this. Since we are told there is nothing that we need to do to bring about our salvation, then we really don't have to do anything. There is no need for religious practice. There's no need for learning or searching. There's no need to have faith. Everything is a done deal. It's all taken care of already. So who cares about anything? We don't need to go to a temple. We don't even need to hear the Dharma. We don't need precepts, and we certainly don't need anyone telling us what to do or what to believe. Life is A-OK. No need to do anything. No need to think. La-di-da, la-di-da. I've met more than a few people who actually feel this way, and I'm convinced that this belief stems in large part from the version of the story that we've heard and learned in our BCA temples. This is a problem. But a larger problem is that this version, I believe, is a distortion of the Amida story that Shinran Shonin acclaimed as the true essence of the Pure Land Way. Shin Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, is not a form of La-di-da Buddhism. It is a path of the Nembutsu, the practice of saying and hearing the name of the Tathagata of immeasurable light and life. So, Matsumoto Sensei basically was questioning, I think, many of our temples, the way that they were, the focus, if you will, of the temples became skewed a bit, I think, to the cultural and social, and not enough on the Dharma. And so when we talk about the actual teachings, it is something that I think many people shy away from because they don't want to go to that extent, if you will. So I'm grateful that all of you are joining us by Zoom because you are searching and we are together trying to understand better or deepen our understanding, which I think is the crux of spiritual search, is that we do encounter many individuals, we encounter many experiences, but trying to find the meaning behind that is very important. And as I was thinking about all of this, and in particular, why was Shinran Shonin examining these the three sutras? Of course, I explained in the previous sessions of why Shinran Shonin wrote his major piece of work, in which the Shoshinge, the subject that we're supposed to be studying for this fall lecture, comes out in. But why he wrote it all, and why was he examining all this to this detail? And I came to the very simple realization that that's what monks do. In fact, it is part of the Buddhist practice. So for 20 years, when Shinran Shonin was on Mount Hiei practicing as a Tendai monk, what he had to do, the daily routine, was to read the different sutras and to study them. And studying is part of the daily activities. So therefore, when he was in that spiritual search and came across the Pure Land teachings, of course, for him to examine it was very important. And in his examination, and it's not just through him, it's through all the masters before him that have guided him, he came to an understanding that the primary teaching is what we call the teaching of the larger sutra on Amida, or the larger Skavati Vyuha Sutra. And of course, this one, he said, was primarily the important one because of the fact that it talks about what we call the primal vow, or you can even say it's the primal will or the wish of the Buddha. Our previous Gomonshu is the head of our organization. Monshu means the guardian of the gate, literally. Okay, Monshu means the master or guardian of the gate. And so Monshu in our denomination is sort of like the Pope to the Catholics. Okay, and right now we have the 25th Gomonshu as the head of our Honganji organization, but the previous one, we call him the Zen Monshu, or the Monshu Emeritus. He emeritus. He wrote a book called the Buddha's Wish for the World, and I didn't realize until recently that the Buddha's wish for the world is actually a translation of Honggang. Okay, so Hong is the primal, and then Gan is we've translated it as vow commonly, but Gan means negai or wish. So the Buddha's wish for the world is the primal vow or the primal wish. And what he was talking about is because this larger sutra talks about this or has as a center of it this primal wish or vow, it is the most sacred and most important teaching. And he also talked how when Shinran decodified this larger sutra, especially when he looked at the 48 vows, he selected certain vows that he found were sort of the core of the teaching. Okay? So there are 48 vows altogether, but some of them are vows that are sort of describing beings in the Pure Land, or they're more descriptive of the beings and as well as the Pure Land itself. So it's sort of describing what it looks like type thing. But there are certain vows that Shinran Shonin has selected as what we call the core of this Pure Land Buddhism. And these are what I handed out to you last week. The 11th, the 12th, the 17th, 18th, and the 22nd are the 5 what he called true vows. And then there are 2 more, the 19th and 20th, which he calls the vows leading up to the primal vow. And I'll explain that all this evening. So if we just go look at these 5 vows, first of all. So I think it was two classes ago, I mentioned the fact that in Shinran's writings, and he says right at the beginning of the chapter on teachings, the very first chapter, no, maybe it was last week, I can't remember if it was last week. The very first chapter of his true teaching, practice, and attainment of the Pure Land Way, in the very first part, he says, I see that Amida's direction of virtue to sentient beings has 2 aspects: the aspect of going forth to the Pure Land and the aspect of our return to this world. Okay, the 2 aspects, going to the Pure Land and coming back, right? And so the 11th has to do with going forth. And this is the vow that states, if when I attain Buddhahood, humans and devas in my land should not dwell in a definitely assured state and unfailingly reach nirvana, then may I not attain enlightenment. And so this vow is also known as the vow of necessary attainment of nirvana, or a vow of realization of great nirvana. So this is saying, this vow is saying that the sentient beings will unfailingly attain enlightenment, reach great nirvana. Okay, this is important because in what we call the path of sages, the path of the path of sages, which Shinran had practiced for 20 years, there are various levels to enlightenment. Okay, there's actually 52 altogether, 52 levels, and up to the 40th level, it's one of those. It's like if you have steps going up. Okay, and up to that 40th level, it's it can go up, but you can also go backslide, right? And the 40th level, which is the level of what we call the bodhisattvas, and there's 10 levels within the bodhisattvas. Once you hit that 40th level, you can't slide back. Okay, you could go back to that 40th, but you won't go back any further below that. Okay, so this was seen to be a sort of a great level because it's assuring one of ultimately attaining enlightenment. And so what this vow states is that those beings who, when Amida attains enlightenment, or when becomes Amida, that all beings will assuredly attain that particular level, and which ultimately means that they will ultimately attain nirvana. So this is a very important vow in the sense that it's giving us assurance that when we hear the name of the Buddha, we will ultimately also attain enlightenment. Shinran, actually, when you look at these chapters in his writing, in his true teaching practice, attainment of Pure Land Way, as I mentioned last time or 2 times ago, I can't remember now. After each chapter title, there's a subtitle, right? And then also at the beginning of each chapter, there's a little bit of an introduction. And in that introduction, he actually talks about these 5 vows. And so this one particular vow, vow 11, he talks about in the chapter on realization. If we go to this particular chapter on realization, let me just find the beginning of it. Okay, so it says here at the very beginning of that, reverently contemplating the true Buddha and the true Buddha land, I find that the Buddha is the Tathagata, inconceivable light, and that the land also is the land of immeasurable light. Because they have arisen through the fulfillment of vows of great compassion, they are called true fulfilled Buddha and land. There are relevant vows that were made, the vows of light and life. So actually, these two are talking about the 12th and the 13th vow. But also in this chapter, he talks about the fact that those who had encountered the Buddha's Amida Buddha's teaching will ultimately attain enlightenment. So the 11th, 12th, and 13th vow. So the 12th vow, and so this is the vow of light. He says, if when I attain Buddhahood, my light should be limited, unable to illuminate at least 100,000 kodis of Nayutas of Buddha lands, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. So this is a spatial dimension. So if you want to look at it horizontally, right, the Buddha is saying his light, or when he attains enlightenment, he will be a Buddha of spatially, the light will cover all Buddha lands, all lands throughout the universe. So this is the horizontal plane. And if we look at the 13th one, the Buddha says, or in the 13th vow, it says, if when I attain Buddhahood, my lifespan should be limited, even to the extent of 100,000 kodis of Nayutas or Kalpas, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. So again, this one is the vertical plane. So from eons past to the future, this Amida will exist. And so that's why when Shakyamuni Buddha was telling his disciple Ananda, when Ananda asked, has Amida already become a Buddha? But Shakyamuni says, yes, he's presently in this, what we call Skavati, and is presently expounding the teachings. So this immeasurable life is the vertical axis. So you have horizontal and vertical axis, right? And our life is at that crossroad, right at the center between the horizontal and the vertical. And so when we hear the teachings, or when we encounter the teachings, it's through all the past and all the horizontal that has come together at this one point. And so when we awaken to that, or realize that, we then begin to realize that my life is not just this point, but it is connected horizontally and it is connected vertically. So each of us is at this crossroad. Each of us represents this point, this, what do you call the point between the two axes? That point is where we are. And when we realize that, then we begin to see our connection with all of the universe, that we are in fact part of each of us as part of it. And this is also why that Buddhism talks about the Indra's net, and I've mentioned this in my previous talks as well, that there's the analogy that's often used is that every single being is like a net or like a jewel in what we call Indra's net. Indra's net is a net that's like throughout the universe, where each connection of the net, intersection of the net, has a jewel in it. And every single jewel is illuminated by all the other jewels, and they sort of shine simultaneously, and they emanate bright light simultaneously. So our existence is because of the existence, both vertical and horizontally, of the universe. And this is what Amida Buddha is talking about. And this is what Shinran, in his decodifying these 48 vows, he's talking about. So that's the 12th and 13th vow, talk about this infinite space and infinite life. Okay, go horizontal and vertical. The 17th is talking directly about the practice. As I mentioned previously, that in Buddhism we talk about the fact that there's what we call the teaching, and then there's a practice that follows it. So in this vow, it says, if when I attain Buddhahood, innumerable Buddhas in the lands of the 10 directions should not all praise and glorify my name, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. Okay. This is also known as the vow that all Buddhas praise the name, also as the vow that all Buddhas say the name, also as the vow of directing virtue for our going forth, and also known as the vow in which the saying of the name is selected. I could send you all this information. I don't think I have that part in the material that I sent to you. But basically what you have to know is that this is seen as the practice, if you will, of Pure Land Buddhism, not because we are saying it, but because all the Buddhas throughout praise the name of Amida. So basically, what Shina is saying is that all the Buddhas throughout the universe recognize the value or importance. Oh, hello there. We have a dog joining our session. I see Debbie's dog joining our session. But we have all the Buddhas who have attested to the enlightenment of Amida, the coming of Amida, if you will. And so it is their guidance that this is the true practice. And we had, when was it? Last year? So last year, we had the minister from Oregon Buddhist Temple. He joined us as our guest sensei in Zoom, and I'm just drawing a blank right now. Anyways, he gave a very interesting analogy, and he was saying that he was supposed to go to another temple's function, and he assumed that the function would be held at the temple. So on that day that that he was supposed to be at that temple, he drove to where that temple was, the temple parking lot, and it was empty. And so he was very surprised at this, and he's getting really worried. And as it turned out, as he was sitting there, he had arrived there quite a bit earlier. As he was sitting in the parking lot, worrying about where everybody is, one of the, I think it was the temple president, happened to come by. And he was then told that, in fact, a function was happening at a different facility. And this president was just coming by to pick something up at the temple. And so, because he said he um, didn't know where the other facility where the function was going on at, the temple president told him, well, just follow me and I will guide you. And so he followed the temple president and was able to get to that facility. But he was saying, had he said, no, I'm going to find it myself or I'm going to do it on my own, he said it would have been folly of him, because he doesn't know the layout of the land or anything of the city. So of course it's easier to follow somebody who's already had the experience of going there, right? So this is why he was saying when we talk about the Namo Amida Butsu, or the saying of the name as being praised by all the Buddhas, he is saying this is all of our past, if you will. All of not just the Buddhas, but our ancestors who passed down this teaching to us. It is all their experience as well. And for us to say, no, I don't think that's right, I'm going to go this way, or I'm going to do something else. If we don't know the direction ourselves, we should listen to the experience of those of our past. So this is what he was explaining. But so the fact that Shinran is saying, this vow is saying that the saying of the name Namo Amida Butsu was not something that we choose ourselves, but it is because all the Buddhas praise the name of Amida. This is why it's seen as this great practice. Interestingly enough, some of you may think, well, you haven't heard this, but in fact, you have. If you attend services on a regular basis, so those of you who attend our temple services, we have we chant the Amida Sutra on the first month, first Sunday of every month. We haven't been doing it as much since the pandemic, but in the Amida Sutra, there is a section, we call it Roppo-dan. Roppo is 6 directions. And what they're saying is that in this Roppo-dan, let me see, do I have? I'll bring it up next week. But it talks about in the 6 directions, and they start listing off names of all these different Buddhas, and then they say the Buddhas then spread out their tongues on the how many thousand Dharma worlds? I can't remember, but to praise the name of the Buddha. So, in fact, the Amida Sutra that we chant is basically talking it. It is also seen as a sutra in which the Buddhas praise the name of the Buddha or saying the name of the Buddha. So, the recitation of the name is the practice, the true practice. And Shinran actually focuses on this in his chapter on practice. And we'll get into that probably next week as we talk more about that. So I'm going to skip the 18th for a second here. We're going to go down to the 22nd. And the 22nd one is a very interesting vow because, as I mentioned, when Shinran at the beginning of his chapter on teaching says that there are 2 aspects, going forth to the Pure Land and the other aspect coming back, right? This one is definitely referring to that coming back. Okay, so if it's a little lengthy, but it says, if when I attained Buddhahood, Bodhisattvas in the Buddha lands of the other directions who visit my land should not ultimately and unfailingly reach the stage of becoming a Buddha after one more life, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. Accepted are those who wish to teach and guide sentient beings in accordance with their original vows. For they wear the armor of great vows, accumulate merits, deliver all beings from birth, death, visit Buddha lands to perform the Bodhisattva practices, make offerings to Buddhas, Tagatas throughout the 10 quarters, enlighten uncountable sentient beings as numerous as the sands of the river Ganges, and establish them in the highest perfect enlightenment. Such bodhisattvas transcend the course of practice of the ordinary bodhisattva stages and actually cultivate the virtues of Samantabhadra. So Samantabhadra was known as the bodhisattva of wisdom. And basically, those who wish to return back to this world to help those still in suffering can choose to do so. So when we talk during our monthly memorial services and we say we've gathered here to remember our loved ones, but in fact, I always say it's our loved ones who have come back to work on relieving us from our ignorance. This is what this vow is talking about. So now the Pure Land is not a place where one just, it's not paradise where one goes and sits and relaxes. Okay. One actually becomes one with the working or the wish of the Buddha. And that's to liberate all those who are still in ignorance. So I've mentioned the two aspects of Buddhism that are the core of Buddhist ideals and beliefs are wisdom and compassion, right? And wisdom only becomes wisdom when it is shared with others, and that sharing is expression of compassion. So when one enters the Pure Land, ultimately one does not just stay there and relax for their own benefit. You might have a moment to relax. No, I don't even know if you have a moment to relax. I think ultimately you activate as compassion. Okay, so you ultimately you want to liberate others from their suffering because their suffering is your suffering. It becomes one, and so that's how it works out when we talk about loved ones coming back to guide us. That's what we're talking about, is that according to the Pure Land teachings, when one attains enlightenment, it's not just a place of pleasure in that sense. You become one with Amida, the working of Amida. So underlying all of that, though, Shinran said, and this was the 18th vow, correct? If one hears the name and well, so the 18th vow is written here. If when I attain Buddhahood, sentient beings in the lands of the 10 directions who sincerely and joyfully entrust themselves to me, desire to be born in my land, and call my name even 10 times, should not be born there, may I not attain the perfect enlightenment. Excluded, however, are those who commit the 5 grave offenses and abuse the right dharma. So this is a lot of people question this very last statement, the one we call the exclusionary statement. But Shinran has very specifically mentioned that the reason why Amida Buddha, or why this is written in this vow, is to show to pre-warn beings, like a mother pre-warns a child, don't go running into the road, right? Because you know what's going to happen if they run into the road. So it doesn't mean that the mother is going to love the child less, but it's just sort of pre-warning them. So Shinran says that these two exclusionary comments are showing that this is very bad, but those beings that may commit this, not to worry, that they are still, as we are, received by the Buddha. And the reason why Shinran says this vow is important, he uses what we call the completion statement. This is also part of the larger sutra. After the Buddha gives 48 vows, he then goes to practices. It's said that this bodhisattva named Dharmakara goes to 5 kalpas or 5 eons of practice, and he fulfills his vows that he's made. And at that stage, he completes the vows, and he then makes what we call the completion statement. And so it says, all Buddhas, Tathagatas in the 10 directions, as numerous as the sands of the river Ganges, together praise the inconceivable supernatural virtue of Amitayus. So this part here is this 17th vow, right? He's saying that all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are praising this name. And then he continues on by saying, all sentient beings who have heard this name rejoice in faith, remember him even once, and sincerely transfer the merit of virtuous practices to that land, aspire to be born there, will attain birth and dwell in the stage of non-retrogression. So this is in correspondence to the 18th vow. And this is basically saying, if you truly hear the name, and this was the underlying I guess, wish of the Buddha, is to hear the compassion of the Buddha, to hear the wisdom of the Buddha. And when we hear that, then we rejoice. And when we have that deep sense of joy in awakening, receiving it, then at that moment, we are, as the translation goes, grasp, never to be abandoned. Okay? And so what this comes down to is, for each of us in our spiritual journeys, listening and awakening to the calling voice of the universe that says, I am part of this vertical and horizontal axis. I am that intersection, or I am at that intersection. I am right now, this present instance is the culmination of the past and the future, as well as spatially throughout the universe. So awakening to that calling voice is the realization of what we call Namo Amida Butsu. And for Shinran, this was a path that he found so strong that it compelled him to lead the rest of his life following this particular path. And so for many of us in our modern era, we might think, well, it's hard for me to fathom that. But it was hard for people in Shinran's age to fathom that as well. But through his readings of the sutras and coming to the realization that there is something that is working towards us constantly, and that is this Dharma. And this is not so undifferent from other schools of Buddhism. We just come at it from different angles, different directions, but ultimately leading up to that same conclusion, if you will, is that releasing ourselves to the Dharma, to the universe that is working to awaken us, and letting go of our egocentric self more and more. Okay, and that letting go of the egocentric self can only come about when we are sensing the working of something greater, because it's so very difficult to do it on our own. And this past Sunday, I was giving for some of you who are attended, I gave the talk on the fact that the this wish of the Buddha, or this what we call the primal vow, is the vow that says, you know, relax a bit, accept yourself with all your faults, that you can be uh, a being with faults, and still come in touch with something greater, the universe, the oneness that exists. And that's through listening and deepening, I guess, our awareness of the teachings. And so by going through this, it's a process of osmosis. By listening to it over and over, slowly things start to sink in a little. Hopefully, it'll make some sense to you. And then there's also two other vows that Shinran places real importance on. They're called the 19th and the 20th vows. And these are vows that it was actually more controversial after Shinran passed away, several hundred years after Shinran passed away. In what we call the Edo period of Japan, there are great debates that go on about the understanding of um, Pure Land teachings. And one of the great debates is what we call Sangan Tenyu. And what Sangan Tenyu means that one has to go. So there was a school of thought that said one has to go through various stages in order to gain to the stage of completely letting yourself go to the Dharma. Okay. So if we look at Shinran's life, he spends 20 years as a monk doing these various difficult practices, trying to attain enlightenment. And so the 19th vow says, if when I attain Buddhahood, beings in the lands of the 10 directions who awaken aspiration for enlightenment, do various meritorious deeds, and sincerely desire to be born in my land, should not, at their death, see me appear before them, surrounded by a multitude of sages, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. So what this is saying is that if you have the aspiration to enlightenment, and you do all these practices, then at the time of death, you will see the appearance of the Buddha. What this is meaning is that we do all these various practices, meritorious practices for attainment of perfect enlightenment. These are practices. Ultimately, though, what happens as you do these practices, you realize the limitations of these practices. Or Shinran himself experienced the limitations in these practices, and that compelled him to go further. And that's the 20th vow. It says, if when I attain Buddhahood, beings in the lands of the 10 directions who, having heard my name, concentrate their thoughts on my land, do various meritorious deeds, and sincerely transfer the merits towards my land with a desire to be born there, should not eventually fulfill their aspiration, then may I not attain perfect peace. So here, it's sort of focusing down from doing all various kind of practices to focusing specifically on Amida Buddha. But it's still focusing with the thought of, I am thinking of on Amida Buddha. It's not the, it's still with what we call self power, because it's, I am trying to do this, but you're narrowing your focus. And then that ultimately leads, even if you narrow your focus, you realize, oh, this is still my ego that's doing this. And there comes a point where you completely let it go. So in Shinran's life, it said that when he was in his, I think it was his 60s or maybe 70s, there was a great plague or flu or illness that was going around in Japan. And Shinran himself came down with a fever. And in his delirium, it was said he started chanting the larger sutra over and over. And he was chanting it for the benefit of all beings who were suffering at that time. And according to his wife, Shini, Shinran comes to the realization, he awakens from the fever and realizes, oh, I'm still trying to do it. It's an egocentric thing that I'm trying to do. And then realizes I have to completely let go of even that effort and rely on the working of the Buddha. Um, there was a famous, what we call Myokoni, wondrously pious individual in the 1800s by the name of Shoma. And Shoma was illiterate, but he was very wise, if you will, in the Nembutsu teachings. And he became quite famous. He lived on the island of Shikoku. And so people would come from afar to ask for his guidance. And there's a story of one time where Shoma he was busy doing something in the Hondo, I think. Anyways, he was busy at the temple doing something when this visitor comes from quite a distance, wanting to know about how one enters the Pure Land, thinking Shoma had some great wisdom that he can share with them. And so he comes and he asks Shoma, and Shoma doesn't say anything to him. He continues working away at what he's doing. And the other people who were at the temple were finding Shoma to act rather odd. And so this person waits for Shoma, but Shoma just continues on with what he's doing. And so at the end of the day, this person is about to leave, really disheartened by the fact that Shoma didn't really pay attention to him. And as he's about to leave, Shoma shows up, and he says to him, if you're so worried about how to get to the Pure Land, why don't you ask Amida? It's got nothing to do with me. He says, I'm not the one that can help you to that. He says, you have to ask Amida. So this person, it said, is very deeply moved by what Shoma said. And you have to, I guess, understand the mindset. It's that basically what Shoma is not trying to slough off this person, but he's saying for each of us, this spiritual path has to be our own path. And what we gain from others, you know, that's really inconsequential. It's what we in our own path see from the teachings. What we can, when we hear the workings of the Buddha, that's what's important. So these were what we call the important vows of of the Pure Land Path. Oh, and I'm sorry, the 1920s. So it's said that so there was a school of thought that said that you had to go through this process of sort of trying many different things and then whittling it down to thinking on the Buddha. But even that you had to let go of. And ultimately, the 18th vow, where we receive the mind of the Buddha, where we receive the entrusting heart of the Buddha, that's what we have to go through, this process. And so there was a school of thought that said you had to go through this process, but there was another school of thought that said no, one could just listen to this, to others like Shina who have had that experience and rely upon what they had said. So there was the argument that went on. Ultimately, it's according to the Honganji, they say you do not have to go through that process, but you can rely upon the words and the teachings of Shinran and all the other masters, and then awaken to this 18th vow. Whether that's I think we all need to go on our own spiritual search. I think we all need to listen. I think we all need to educate ourselves for our own self. And so I tend to believe that it is important for us, um, not just to accept, but to listen, to learn, and say, okay, I understand where Shinran is coming from when he says this. And so this true teaching, practice, and attainment of the Pure Land Way is basically to explain these core vows that are in the largest sutra. And so next time we're going to talk a little bit about what I'd like to do next time is talk a little bit, focus on the chapter on this practice, and ultimately leading into the end of that chapter is where this Shoshinge, Shoshin Nembutsuge, which is the hymn of the Nembutsu path. And it actually connects the great practice with what we call Shinjin, or entrusting heart, the chapter on Shinjin. So next time what I'll do is get into this great practice and then talk about how that Shoshinge it comes about at the end of that. Did I lose you all? Um, eh, that's as far as I wanted to talk to today. Um, questions, comments? Were you able to follow, or were you not able to follow? I'd be interested to hear people's comments or thoughts or any questions. Um, anyone?
Um, I just your mention of Indra's net
Yes.
and the 3,000 Dharma, the Dharma realms.
Yes.
This is like these are all pure lands, right? They're normally part of the universe.
Yeah. They're part of uh, so the Buddha's cosmology is very different, and they've got all these different realms of existing. Uh, in a way, so I've been telling some of the younger students I like watching the Marvel cinematic universe because they talk about all these different realms of existence, and that's sort of like this. It talks about different realms of existence, time, space, and so they do talk about. It's very graphic in that sense. I think they had much greater sense of imagination than we have today. Back in the days when they didn't have a screen that told us what we're supposed to look at and what we're supposed to think. I think they were, it's very descriptive how they describe things. Even the Pure Land, when we look at the Pure Land Sutras, and they're very repetitive in what they say, but the depth with which they describe the ornaments and the trees, etc., in the Pure Land, you can tell that this was an era where their imagination, if you will, had to I think it was much more colorful than what we see today. But
Actually, like I was going to mention the Tibetan Amitabha service. That goes into that where there's a whole description that you read on the Western Pure Land. So that's still part of like some schools where they still read the actual description of the Pure Land.
well, and we do too when we chant the Amida Sutra. In there is the description of the Pure Land. So it's very interesting because before I went to study in Japan, of course, because I didn't have the Japanese language, it was all very Greek to me. And even to be honest, after I came back from Japan, I still really didn't grasp the details of it. But as we, chanting is funny that way. The more you chant, it literally is like osmosis. You start getting more and more familiar with each part, each section, and then you start seeing um, what the sutra is talking about, and you can actually visualize these different sections, and it becomes uh, yeah, it becomes quite animated actually when you and that's through, I would say, a process of both osmosis as well as through repetitive studying and just chanting it over and over again.
Right.
It is very interesting that way.
Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.
Yes.
Yeah, Sensei, it's Rose here. You know, it just so much of what our senses nowadays, we have so many visuals, but everything you're talking about and we're listening to, if we were to make the screen black, it would be our ears. So our other senses would have to take, and we'd open imagination, which is why children love listening to story.
Mm.
You know, when people couldn't read, when they were illiterate, whatever, it was the story and it was the songs that helped them with those things. And, you know, you start to feel it. You feel it deep within you. And we know coming like on Sunday when you were speaking, and I think it's so important to hear the stories again and again in a context, but also it was Shotsuki, and we're hearing the stories in our own minds. If we saw the names of people, oh, that was Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so. And it brought again to our minds in real, our time now in this moment of someone's life. And now we are sharing it, we're part of it. And it will continue happening through the story because it deepens our understanding, that whole mind-body connection, it deepens. And so, yeah, it's just beautiful to hear story. And that's why so many Indigenous cultures are so vibrant with colors. Look at our own in the Haida, the beautiful totems that are stories. And it's to remind us what we see, what we're seeing, but we close our eyes and we can imagine the warriors going off or the women doing and the men doing whatever it was. It was to make the connections, that Indira net connections in their own culture over time. And I love the fact that here we are in this world with so many different traditions that somehow when we listen just to the story, they ring true for the story that we're living. And so I think, you know, just hearing again on Sunday what you were saying, and because of what we'd been studying that week before, I felt like to Ted, I was like, we just heard this. I think I'm getting the picture, you know, at least in the short time. And that's what's so great about this. And it's really in our hearts. So
Well,
thanks.
thank you for that. And you know, it's actually been scientifically proven as well. And the how it's been proven is that whenever we think of something, whether it's a name that we see on a screen that says, "Oh, I remember this person," what you're doing is you're making the synapses in your brain. You're actually strengthening the connections, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's what interdependence is all about, is uh, strengthening the synapses, not with only our brain, but our universe around us, and realizing that, you know, we are part of this greater existence. And so scientifically, they've shown that when you know, it helps with your memory when you see something that jogs your memory, and you're creating a synapse that strengthening the synapse, if you will. So it's, you know, there's nothing unscientific about it. It's very factual in that sense. It can be measured in that sense, right?
And that's the cool thing. They can measure that now with something called an fMRI, where when they actually hook us up and where maybe it's an anxiety or whatever it is, it shows exactly in the brain where it lights up. But we're also finding that it lights up in every cell in our body.
Hmm.
That's connected over time too. So the neuropsychology that's going on, I mean, we've heard so much and we think, oh, that was such a long time ago. It was it was already known, but the language was different. The way of expressing it was different. So yeah, the connections are encoded in us over, well, the time we've been on this planet, in this universe.
Yeah, and and you're right, because I've also read that where before they always thought the brain was the center of the network, if you will. It's like it was almost one directional, where your thoughts controlled your consciousness controlled everything. But they realize now it's not one directional. That there are
Mhm.
you know
Right.
throughout our body, um, each cell is generating, um,
Mhm.
I guess, the messages or whatever, and it's all interconnected, is what it is. So when we think of it that way, as we chant, all these things that we're doing, there are also connecting our brain and stimulating our brain as well. So all these are interconnected, and this Tuesday night sessions are also one way of connecting, and hopefully you're getting something out of this. And then, um, you know, the more we continue to listen, the more it becomes part of who we are. Anyways, thank you. If anybody else wants to say anything, you're more than welcome to chime in.
I'm,
Otherwise, yes.
I'm rather reluctant to say this, but um, my my aunt passed away, uh, just less than 10 days ago,
Mm,
and I told you about my aunt, Reverend Grant, and my aunt was 101. She would be 102 now, because her birthday was on December the 5th. But it's interesting that this evening, and you're talking about, from last Sunday, and then seeing the names and hearing them and visualizing them, and I'm just visualizing my aunt, because, like I think I told you, Reverend Grant, all my mom's side, they were all born in Mission City, and now, and I've been to the property, decades ago, at what was left of it, and I'm just kind of visualizing all the things, and visualizing my this particular aunt, because that's what brought this all together for me. And so when you're talking about um, visualizing, when you're talking about even just seeing a name, and then it triggers so many things, and so I think it's really true in that regard, and so it just makes everything richer, I guess, in terms of your memories, in terms of your interactions, in terms of what your experiences were, and so in that regard, just with my aunt, and things that I remember about her. So anyways, thanks very much.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So if nobody else has anything else to say, I would like to thank you for joining me tonight, and we will continue on next week. So next week will be the last session before we go on a winter break. And then, so next week, what I'd like to do, as I mentioned, was go into this um, thought of what is the true practice, and how was that decided, or how it came about, and also how the practice and the entrusting heart, or shinjing, how the two of them sort of are interconnected, or dependent on one another. And also that will be the beginning basically of introducing into what we call the Shoshinge, which is at the end of the chapter on practice that leads into the chapter of Shinjing or true and trusting. So we'll do that next week. Then we'll go into a break, and then in January, end of January or so, we'll be going into the actual Shoshinge, breaking it down. And now that you've had this background, a lot of what we talk about when we go into the Shoshinge will make a lot of sense, or you'll be able to say, oh, I know where he's talking about or what he was talking about. Okay. So thanks everyone, and thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Grant.
Sensei.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Sensei.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Arigato. Bye.
Bye.